Hi, English learners. Welcome to English Unlocked, the Oral Mastery. Think of this as your daily dose of inspiration, where learning English feels like a breeze and improving your life feels like home.
Wait, are we changing the entire format of our show today?
No, don't worry. I am actually quoting directly from the source material we are diving into today.
Oh, right. Okay. I was a little confused for a second there.
Yeah, I figure that might throw you off, but I wanted to start with that exact quote because it perfectly sets the tone for the transcript we are unpacking. So welcome, everyone, to today's deep dive. I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. You are trying to learn a completely new, highly complex skill.
Okay, like what?
Let's say it's quantum physics or maybe advanced coding, or, for the sake of today's deep dive, a completely new language. Now, normally, your brain immediately pictures a very specific environment for this, right?
Right, yeah, like a sterile classroom.
Exactly. You picture a remarkably dry, heavy textbook. You picture a teacher at a whiteboard, pointing at conjugations or formulas, and you are sitting at a desk, desperately trying to memorize rules while quietly hoping you don't get called on.
The universal nightmare of adult education.
Right. But what if instead of that sterile, high-pressure academic environment, you walked into the room and the instructor looked at you, pushed the textbook aside, and said, "All right, let's play a high-stakes game of truth or dare."
I mean, it completely shatters the expectation of what a learning environment is supposed to look like.
Yeah, really?
For most adult learners who have been conditioned by, years of traditional schooling, being told to play a vulnerable social game instead of taking notes sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It sounds like a fast track to a panic attack, honestly. And yet, that unconventional, slightly chaotic premise is the foundation of the source material we are unpacking today.
Which is fascinating.
It is. We have a transcript from an English learning audio show called English Unlocked, the Oral Mastery, featuring two hosts named Daniel and Jenny.
And it is worth noting right up front, since this source material is geared specifically towards English learners, the hosts of that show, Daniel and Jenny, are very intentional about their format, right?
Yes, absolutely. They discuss how, because of their audience, the speaking speed must not be too fast.
Right, to keep it accessible.
Exactly. And the vocabulary cannot be too difficult. And they intentionally keep the time within 20 minutes.
Which is a very deliberate pedagogical choice to avoid cognitive overload.
Spot on. And our mission for this deep dive today is to look past the surface of this material. Because on a quick read, it just feels like a casual, somewhat goofy conversation between two friends.
Yeah, it feels very light.
But we're going to break down this transcript as a masterclass in the psychology of learning. We're examining how these two instructors use gamification, humor, and honestly, extreme personal vulnerability to teach complex idiomatic expressions.
It is so much more than just a vocabulary lesson.
It really is. We are going to explore the cognitive science behind why a silly story about a stolen French fry might do more for your long-term memory than 100 flashcards.
Which is why this specific piece of source material is so incredibly rich. While Daniel and Jenny present a very lighthearted dynamic, they tease each other, they tell embarrassing stories, they're actually manipulating some very profound neurological pathways.
Oh, wow. Okay, break that down for us.
Well, they're demonstrating what happens when our emotional centers are actively engaged in the process of acquiring new information. It requires a completely different cognitive mechanism than the rote memorization most of us grew up with.
So it's not just about trying hard to remember words.
Not at all. Let's actually start right at the top of the transcript with the initial banter. Jenny welcomes everyone to the show, but she immediately swerves away from anything resembling a formal lesson.
Right. She looks at her co-host and says, "Daniel, you look like a walking onion today with all those layers."
Exactly. And Daniel leans right into it. He says it was freezing this morning, but now he's wearing so many clothes he feels like a human heater.
Which is just a funny, weird image. A walking onion and a human heater.
It is funny, but this opening exchange is doing immense psychological heavy lifting. In the field of language acquisition, there is a foundational theory regarding something called the affective filter.
The affective filter.
Yeah.
I've heard this term thrown around in linguistics. But what is the actual mechanism there? What is happening in the brain when that filter is active?
Think of the affective filter as an evolutionary defense mechanism. When a learner feels anxious, self-conscious, or stressed by the artificial pressure of a classroom, the brain perceives that social threat as a physical threat.
Wait, really? A physical threat?
Yes, exactly. The amygdala activates, triggering a mild fight or flight response, and when that happens, the brain starts hoarding cognitive resources.
Yeah.
It pulls processing power away from the prefrontal cortex, which is where you handle complex tasks like parsing grammar and acquiring new vocabulary, and it routes it toward survival and emotional defense.
So the brain is literally starving the language acquisition center because it thinks it needs to defend itself from looking foolish.
That is the biological reality of it. Yeah. When that affective filter is up, you could expose a student to an hour of perfect, comprehensive input, and it will simply bounce off.
They just won't absorb it.
Right. They might hear the words, but they won't internalize the underlying patterns. The cognitive gateway is locked.
So by starting the session with a ridiculous complaint about the weather, Daniel and Jenny are essentially issuing a stand-down order to the listener's amygdala.
They're signaling safety. By complaining about the cold and using silly imagery like a walking onion, they are grounding the interaction in a universally relatable human experience.
Because everyone knows that feeling.
Exactly. Everyone knows the specific discomfort of overlayering for the cold and ending up sweating on the train. It immediately disarms you as a listener.
It's a mental transition. A lot of learning models compare this to stretching before a workout, but I think it goes deeper than that. It's more like recalibrating the environment. You wouldn't try to tune a delicate musical instrument in the middle of a loud, chaotic construction site.
No, of course not.
You need a quiet room. Daniel and Jenny are creating a quiet, safe room in the listener's mind before they introduce the complex material.
And we really need to look at the specific phrasing they use to build that safe room, because walking onion and human heater are not phrases you will find in a standardized English proficiency exam.
Right. No, you definitely won't find a multiple choice question asking you to conjugate the verb to be a human heater.
Exactly. And that is a deliberate pedagogical choice. Traditional language instruction often relies heavily on rigid formal vocabulary.
Which makes it feel so stiff.
Right. The implicit message sent to the learner is that language is a rigid, formal system of one-to-one translations that must be perfectly memorized and executed.
There's no room for error.
But by playfully inventing metaphors on the spot, Daniel and Jenny are modeling linguistic elasticity. They are showing the listener that language is a tool you can play with.
Oh, I love that. Linguistic elasticity.
Yeah, if you don't know the exact formal word for overdressed, you can use the simple words you do know, like walk and onion, to paint a vivid picture.
It gives the learner permission to improvise. If you are terrified of making a mistake, you stick to the script. But if the instructors are actively making up absurd combinations of words, it lowers the barrier to entry.
It makes it accessible.
But here's where I want to push back a little on this whole safe, stress-free environment concept.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Because right after they lower the affective filter with this onion banter, Jenny introduces the core activity of the episode. She announces they're going to play Truth or Dare in English.
Right.
And Daniel even says in the transcript, that sounds a little scary, because isn't Truth or Dare inherently stressful?
It definitely can.
It's a game entirely based on social pressure, peer scrutiny, and being put on the spot. Why deliberately inject high-pressure social stakes into an environment you just worked so hard to make safe? Doesn't that contradict the biological goal of keeping the amygdala calm?
I see why you'd think that. It seems like a massive contradiction, but it actually reveals a highly sophisticated understanding of how fluency is built. The goal of this kind of instruction isn't to eliminate stress entirely.
It's not.
No. The goal is to induce a very specific type of simulated stress.
Simulated stress, like putting a pilot in a flight simulator before letting them fly a real plane.
That is a very apt comparison. A flight simulator is safe. You can't actually crash and die, but it still induces a physiological stress response.
Right, your palms sweat.
Yes, the pilot's heart rate goes up. They have to manage multiple inputs under a time constraint. Learning a language requires a similar controlled burn.
The controlled burn.
Yeah. If a student only ever practices in a completely sterile, zero-pressure vacuum, they will develop a false sense of competence. The moment they step into the real world, where they have to negotiate a price or argue with a landlord or try to be funny at a dinner party, the social pressure will cause their affective filter to slam back down and they will freeze.
Oh, man. I have been there.
We all have.
So Truth or Dare acts as a social simulator. It artificially recreates the social pressure of real-world communication, but contains it within the agreed-upon boundaries of a game.
Precisely. And the cognitive shift that occurs when you introduce a game mechanic is profound. When a student is doing a standard grammar drill, their conscious mind is entirely focused on mechanics.
They're just thinking about the rules.
Right. They are thinking, I must place the adjective before the noun, I must use the past participle. It is an analytical, exhausting process. But when you introduce the stakes of truth or dare, the brain's primary objective shifts from, I must conjugate this verb correctly, to, I must survive this social interaction and tell a compelling story.
The brain gets distracted by the game.
Exactly.
The language ceases to be the object of study and reverts back to its natural purpose, which is just a tool used to accomplish a social goal.
Distraction is a very powerful pedagogical tool. Let's actually examine the truth mechanics specifically. When Daniel chooses truth, he is forced out of the analytical mode and into the narrative mode.
Right.
He has to access an episodic memory, organize the timeline of events, recall the emotional weight of the situation, and then translate all of that into a coherent structure for his listener.
Think about your own experiences for a second if you're listening to this right now. Have you ever noticed that you speak a second language or even perform a complex physical task like playing a sport much more fluidly when you are slightly distracted?
It happens all the time.
Yeah, maybe you're arguing passionately about a movie or trying to explain a joke, and suddenly you realize you haven't been translating the vocabulary in your head for the last 5 minutes.
You're just speaking.
Right. You bypass the analytical bottleneck because your desire to communicate the meaning overrode your fear of making a mechanical error.
That state of flow is the holy grail of language teaching. And we see Daniel and Jenny trigger that flow state beautifully in the first major segment of the transcript. Daniel chooses truth, and Jenny asks him a highly specific question,
She asks if he has ever held a grudge over something really small.
which introduces our first major idiom.
Yes, and I love how they don't pause the show to give a dictionary definition. They don't say, class, please note that hold a grudge is a verb phrase meaning to maintain resentment.
That would kill the momentum completely.
It really would. They dissect it organically within the flow of the banter. Daniel repeats the phrase thoughtfully. He goes, hold a grudge. That means staying angry with someone for a long time, right?
And Jenny follows up with a deeply visceral explanation. She says, yes, you smile on the outside, but inside you are still a bit bitter. Notice how she bypasses the abstract definition and goes straight for the physical and emotional sensation.
She defines the invisible emotion by describing the visible physical reaction. We've all experienced that exact phenomenon. The tight, fake smile you give a coworker while internally fuming over something entirely petty.
It's a universal human experience.
It really is.
And by grounding the vocabulary in that universal sensation, they prepare the listener's brain to receive the story. And Daniel's story is an incredible example of how to anchor vocabulary. He announces he is going to spill the beans.
Another great idiom seamlessly dropped in.
Layering idioms like hold a grudge and spill the beans could easily overwhelm a learner if they were just bullet points on a whiteboard.
Oh, for sure. You just zone out.
But because they are the dramatic buildup to a confession, the brain accepts them as necessary narrative tools.
And the confession is wonderfully absurd. Daniel admits that he held a deep, simmering grudge against a friend for 3 entire years.
3 years.
3 years. And the offense. His friend ate his last French fry. And Daniel's very specific about this. He doesn't just call it a French fry. He calls it the VIP fry.
The very important person, Fry. It's a brilliant, spontaneous piece of anthropomorphism.
It's so funny.
He's elevating a piece of fast food to the status of a foreign dignitary whose assassination sparked a 3-year Cold War.
Jenny's reaction mirrors exactly what the listener's thinking. She laughs and says, 3 years for one potato. That is so bittersweet. Which drops yet another complex vocabulary word into the mix.
Let's look at the cognitive mechanism of why this specific, ridiculous story is so effective for retention. Human memory is broadly divided into different systems. Semantic memory is responsible for storing isolated facts, numbers, and dictionary definitions.
Okay.
It's the part of the brain you use to memorize a list of state capitals or vocabulary words.
And it's notoriously unreliable unless you constantly review the data, right?
Exactly, because semantic memory evolved to be highly efficient at discarding information that doesn't seem immediately relevant to survival.
So if I just hand you a flashcard,
If I give you a list of 10 abstract idioms today, your semantic memory will likely dump them by tomorrow. But episodic memory is different.
how so?
Episodic memory stores narratives, events, and emotional experiences. Our brains are evolutionarily wired to remember stories, especially stories involving social dynamics, conflict, and humor.
So if we use the analogy of a mental filing cabinet, rote vocabulary words go into a blank, unmarked manila folder. The brain's search engine is going to struggle to find that folder a week from now among millions of other unmarked folders.
Exactly.
But Daniel's story creates a folder made of neon pink cardboard with a giant picture of a French fry on it.
The absurdity is the filing mechanism.
Oh, I like that.
The brain loves novelty. It tags the image of a 3-year silent war over a potato as highly novel and therefore worth keeping. So a month from now, when the listener encounters the phrase hold a grudge, their brain won't struggle to recall the semantic definition.
It'll just pop right up.
It will instantly pull up the episodic memory of the VIP fry. The story acts as a permanent anchor for the vocabulary.
What fascinates me about this exchange, though, isn't just the absurdity. It's the sudden pivot to emotional validation. Daniel's laughing about it, but he says, I know, it's silly, but in that moment, it felt like a betrayal.
Betrayal is an incredibly potent word to use in the context of a potato.
It is. But by using such a strong, heavy word, he is doing something crucial for the learner. He is validating the subjective emotional reality of the experience. We often feel disproportionately massive emotions over tiny, trivial things.
Absolutely.
Objectively, it was just a piece of fried food. But subjectively, in that moment, his friend violated the social contract. It was a betrayal of trust. By acknowledging that subjective reality, Daniel takes high-level dramatic vocabulary words like betrayal, grudge, bittersweet, and maps them onto everyday, accessible experiences.
He is bridging the gap between dramatic language and mundane life. He's showing the learner that they don't need to have experienced a Shakespearean tragedy to use powerful English words. They just need to tap into the petty grievances of their own daily lives.
Which transitions us perfectly from the mechanics of holding a grudge to the absolute paralyzing fear of looking foolish. Because if gamification simulates stress, the next segment tackles the ultimate barrier in language learning, the fear of social rejection.
This is where it gets really interesting.
They take a quick breather, and then it is Jenny's turn in the hot seat.
Right.
And she makes the brave choice to go with truth.
And Daniel immediately asks her to describe a time she spilled her heart out to the wrong person.
Once again, the organic vocabulary breakdown happens instantly. Jenny clarifies the idiom. She says, spill your heart out means talking openly about all your deep feelings, right? And Daniel gives a fantastic visual definition. He says, no walls, just honesty.
It's a beautiful metaphor, dropping the defensive walls. And it sets the stage for a story that, from a psychological standpoint, is the emotional core of this entire transcript.
Yes, the taxi confessional.
The taxi confessional.
Jenny sets the scene by explaining she was having a genuinely terrible day. She was highly stressed, feeling overwhelmed, and her affective filter, to use your term from earlier, was completely shattered.
She was vulnerable.
Very vulnerable. She gets into the back of a taxi cab, and the driver looks in the rearview mirror and says 2 words, long day.
2 basic, perfunctory words of polite small talk.
The absolute bare minimum of social interaction. But Jenny takes this basic pleasantry as an invitation to a full-blown therapy session.
Oh, no.
She says she exploded with words. She dumps her entire life story onto this poor driver. She talks about her work stress, her complicated family dynamics, her unfulfilled dreams. She explicitly tells Daniel, I felt very vulnerable.
As a listener, you can feel the secondhand embarrassment building.
Yeah.
You were in the back seat of that taxi with her, watching her make this massive social miscalculation in real time.
And Daniel acts as the audience surrogate here. He leans in and asks the question we all want the answer to. He asks, and what did the driver say? Did he give you great advice?
Because we've all seen movies. We are conditioned to expect the cinematic moment where the wise, stoic taxi driver dispenses a profound piece of life advice that changes the protagonist's perspective.
We want the Hollywood ending.
But reality rarely follows a cinematic script. Instead, we get the comedy of anticlimax.
The punchline is just devastating. After Jenny pours her soul out for the entire ride, the driver simply looks at her and says, yes, ma'am, traffic is very bad today.
It is brilliant comedic timing. Daniel absolutely cracks up, calling it a classic truth moment. But the pedagogical value of this story goes far beyond a quick laugh.
How so?
Look at how Jenny concludes the narrative. After the laughter subsides, she says, I felt so embarrassed, but it's okay to be human.
It's okay to be human. It sounds like a simple platitude,
Yeah.
but in the context of language acquisition, it is a radical statement.
It addresses the single greatest hurdle adult learners face. Children acquire language easily, partly because they lack a developed sense of social embarrassment.
They just don't care.
Right. If a child says a word wrong and people laugh, the child often laughs with them and tries again. An adult's ego is much more fragile. The fear of mispronouncing a word, of using the wrong idiom, of misreading a social cue and looking foolish, that fear prevents adults from opening their mouths at all.
The taxi driver in Jenny's story is essentially the ultimate linguistic brick wall. Think about it. Jenny was playing a game of emotional tennis. She threw the ball up and hit it as hard as she could, pouring all of this vulnerability and vocabulary into the interaction, expecting a volley in return.
And the driver, the brick wall, didn't hit the ball back.
He didn't even acknowledge the game was being played. The ball just hit the wall and dropped flat on the floor. Traffic is very bad today. Thud.
And every single person learning a new language is going to hit that exact same brick wall.
Oh, inevitably.
You are going to spend 10 minutes mentally constructing the perfect complex sentence to order a coffee. You are going to deploy it with all the courage you can muster, and the barista is just going to stare at you blankly and say, "What?"
That feels crushing.
It feels exactly like Jenny in the back of that taxi. It's a failed social bid.
But the crucial takeaway is Jenny's reaction to the failure. The embarrassment didn't destroy her. She didn't swear off taking taxis for the rest of her life, and she didn't stop speaking English. She recognized the utter absurdity of the situation. She embraced the fact that social miscalculations are an unavoidable part of being human, and she turned it into a hilarious story.
By broadcasting this intensely embarrassing moment to her audience, she is modeling resilience. She is proving that you can survive looking foolish.
You won't actually die from embarrassment.
No, you won't. In fact, she is suggesting that the willingness to look foolish is a prerequisite for what their show calls oral mastery. If you cannot handle the sting of a failed social bid, you will never push your language skills beyond the safe confines of a textbook.
Which brings us to a transition in the transcript that pushes the learner from emotional vulnerability into physical vulnerability.
Yes, the dare.
Daniel announces that the truth portion of the game is over. It is time for the dare. And Jenny's reaction changes instantly. She goes from being a confident storyteller to expressing genuine panic.
The transcript explicitly says she starts to freak out. She begs Daniel, "Please don't put me on the spot."
And in this moment of panic, we get this incredibly dense cluster of very specific idioms. Freak out, put on the spot. And a moment later, Daniel tells her not to chicken out. I want to call this the anxiety lexicon.
The anxiety lexicon, it's a perfect categorization, and we need to unpack why teaching this specific vocabulary is so vital and yet so rare in standard curricula.
Right, because Chapter 1 of a textbook teaches you how to say hello, my name is. Chapter 2 teaches you how to ask for directions to the train station. Very rarely does a textbook dedicate a chapter to teaching you how to articulate that you are currently experiencing a conversational panic attack.
Because traditional curricula assume a flawless transfer of information. They assume you will know what to say.
Which is never true in practice.
Exactly. The reality of speaking a non-native language is that you will frequently find yourself completely overwhelmed. You will lose the thread of the conversation. You will forget a crucial word. You will feel the pressure of the other person waiting for you to finish your sentence.
It's a horrible feeling.
If a learner lacks the vocabulary to express that internal overwhelm, they only have two physiological responses available to them: freeze in silence or physically remove themselves from the conversation.
They literally run away.
Yes, but by equipping learners with the anxiety lexicon, giving them the tools to say, "Wow, you are really putting me on the spot right now," or "I'm kind of freaking out, let me start over," you are giving them conversational agency.
You give them the power to press pause. Instead of failing the interaction, they can manage the expectations of the person they are speaking to. They can narrate their own struggle in real time, which usually makes the native speaker much more empathetic and patient.
It buys them time.
It's giving them the meta-language to talk about their anxiety while they are experiencing it.
It is an incredibly empowering set of tools, and Jenny needs those tools because Daniel does not let her off the hook. He issues the dare.
And it's not a physical dare like doing push-ups. It is a purely linguistic challenge, a tongue twister.
Right.
He challenges her to say, "She sells seashells by the seashore," 3 times fast.
Which is notoriously difficult even for native speakers because of the rapid alternation between the alveolar fricative S and the postalveolar fricative S.
Say that again.
The S sound and the SH sound.
Ah, okay. And Jenny Despite being the co-host of an English mastery show, completely falls apart. The transcript captures the exact moment the wheels come off. She starts strong, she sells seashells, and then she hits the wall, she shells. The physical machinery just jams up.
This specific moment highlights an aspect of language acquisition that we usually ignore: the biomechanics of speaking.
The biomechanics.
Yes. We have a tendency to treat language solely as a cognitive exercise. We treat it like a software problem. The assumption is that if you memorize the vocabulary and internalize the grammar rules, the software is installed and it should execute perfectly.
But speaking isn't just software. It's a massive hardware problem.
Exactly. Speech requires the highly coordinated movement of the diaphragm, vocal cords, tongue, lips, and jaw. When you learn a new language, you are asking those muscles to move in sequences and hit positions that they have never attempted in your entire life.
Which is crazy to think about.
It requires the development of completely new physical muscle memory. And just like learning a complex new dance routine, your body is going to rebel. Your tongue is literally going to trip over itself.
And the way Daniel handles her physical stumble is pedagogical perfection. When she messes up the S and SH sounds, he doesn't stop the game and say, "No, Jenny, place your tongue closer to your teeth. Let's drill this sound 10 times.
He doesn't pull out the red pen and correct the mechanics.
No, he laughs and says, "Your tongue went on holiday." Your tongue went on holiday. It is such a generous, brilliant framing of a mistake. Notice what it does psychologically. It completely externalizes the error.
That's a great point.
It removes the blame from Jenny's intellect or her dedication. It says, you aren't stupid and you aren't failing. Your physical tongue just decided to pack its bags and take a quick vacation to the Bahamas right in the middle of the sentence.
It separates the learner's identity from their physical performance. And by doing so, it encourages repetition without shame. He tells her not to chicken out, and she tries again. When she inevitably stumbles again, she laughs with him and calls it a disaster. But she immediately follows that up by saying, "It's great pronunciation practice."
By broadcasting this disaster to their audience, Daniel and Jenny are completely demystifying the process of achieving fluency. The listener hears an expert, someone whose job is to teach English, physically fail to produce the sounds.
It normalizes the hardware malfunction.
It proves that native-like pronunciation isn't a magical gift you are born with. It is just the result of putting your tongue in the wrong place 1,000 times until it finally builds the muscle memory to find the right place.
Which brings us to the final act of this transcript. And this is where we see Daniel and Jenny elevate the lesson from a passive listening experience to an active metacognitive exercise.
They don't just finish the game and say goodbye. They pass the torch to the listener.
As Daniel looks at the camera or into the microphone and issues a final dare directly to the audience. He asks them to describe the weather inside their brain right now.
The weather inside their brain.
And he offers a few prompts to get them started. He asks, "Is it sunny? Is there a storm of overthinking?"
From a cognitive perspective, this is a massive leap in complexity. Think about the progression of the idioms we've seen so far. Holding a grudge is relatively concrete. It describes a specific internal state directed at a specific external person based on a specific event, like a stolen French fry. Spilling the beans describes a concrete action of telling a secret. But asking someone to describe their brain weather requires profound, abstract reasoning.
You're asking the listener to pause, look inward, assess their own complex, swirling psychological state, and then map that invisible state onto meteorological phenomena.
It is the definition of metacognition thinking about thinking.
And Jenny models how to do this beautifully. She says that after the stress of the tongue twister, her brain weather is a quiet fog. Contrast that with Daniel's suggestion of a storm of overthinking. These are highly poetic, abstract constructs.
By issuing this dare, Daniel's demanding that the listeners synthesize the vocabulary with their own internal emotional landscape. He's pushing them beyond using English merely as a transactional tool to navigate the external world like ordering food or asking for directions. He is challenging them to use the language to articulate the world inside of them.
And that is the threshold between simply speaking a language and truly living in it. When you can express the nuanced difference between a quiet fog of exhaustion and a storm of overthinking in a second language, you have achieved a level of emotional fluency that goes far beyond grammatical correctness.
They wrap up the show by mentioning something called a word tour at the end of the video. This suggests that after all the games and stories, they do provide a structured review of the vocabulary, which is a smart way to ensure the semantic memory gets a little reinforcement after the episodic memory has done the heavy lifting.
It's a great balance.
And then they issue a final call to action. They ask the listeners to comment on whether they prefer truth or dare.
Which serves to solidify the relationship. It shifts the listener from being a passive consumer of an audio file into an active participant in a community. It validates their voice and invites them into the safe room that Daniel and Jenny build at the beginning of the episode.
So if we step back and look at the trajectory of this transcript, it's pretty staggering. What initially presented as a goofy, chaotic conversation about onions, french fries, and taxicabs is actually a rigorously structured curriculum.
It really is. We've tracked how they systematically dismantle the affective filter with relatable physical metaphors. We've examined how they induce a controlled cognitive burn by gamifying the learning process, forcing the brain to prioritize social survival and narrative meaning over analytical grammar rules.
We've seen how they exploit the evolutionary power of episodic memory by tying complex vocabulary to absurd, highly emotional stories, like the 3-year grudge over the VIP potato. They create permanent neurological anchors for idioms that would otherwise be forgotten in a day.
And most importantly, we analyze how they model resilience by openly sharing stories of profound social miscalculation, like the taxi confessional, and by highlighting their own physical inability to execute a tongue twister, they attack the root cause of language failure, the fear of embarrassment.
They prove in real time that it's okay to be human.
And that your tongue going on holiday is a necessary step on the path to mastery.
It's an incredibly dense, brilliantly disguised psychological operation. So I want to turn this directly to you, the person listening to this deep dive right now. We have unpacked a lot of cognitive theory, neuroscience, and pedagogical strategy over the last hour.
We covered a lot of ground.
Take a moment to assess your own internal state. What is your brain weather right now? Are you experiencing a storm of overthinking, trying to synthesize the difference between episodic and semantic memory? Or are you perhaps in a state of sunny clarity, seeing your own past learning struggles in a new, more forgiving light? Give yourself the agency to articulate that feeling.
Because acknowledging that internal state is the first step toward controlling your own affective filter.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something that builds on the fundamental philosophy of Daniel and Jenny's approach. When we study a language, or when we study any complex system of human interaction, we have a strong tendency to treat it as a sterile code.
Like a math problem.
Right. We view it as a puzzle to be perfectly cracked. The underlying assumption is that if we learn the rules perfectly, we can flawlessly transmit data from one human brain to another without any errors, without any friction. We treat zero friction as the ultimate goal.
Look closely at the game Daniel and Jenny played today. Look at the friction.
Look at the irrational 3-year silent grudge over a single piece of fried potato. Look at the agonizing, completely one-sided emotional dump in the back of a taxicab to a driver who only cared about the traffic. Look at the physical machinery of the mouth jamming up over the word seashells.
It's all friction.
What if the mistakes, the awkward misunderstandings, the silly irrational grudges, and the deeply embarrassing miscalculations are just the unfortunate side effects of trying to communicate? What if those perfectly imperfect, highly vulnerable moments of friction are the entire point of communicating in the first place? Thank you for joining us on today's deep dive. We'll see you next time.